How do you feel when people don't listen to you? You feel ignored? Frustrated, okay. I've been to doctors that they require them to enter everything onto a computer, and so the whole time they're looking at a computer screen while they're talking to you and trying to listen to you, and they don't have a clue what you just said. I always liked the story about Theodore Roosevelt, who said that nobody ever really listened to him. And so they had a state dinner one night, and everybody that he met, he said, "I shot my grandmother last night." And most of them said, "Very nice, Mr. President." Until he came to the Swiss ambassador and he said, "I shot my grandmother last night." And the Swiss ambassador said, "Sir, your secret is safe with me." So that's the problem, that we don't like people not to listen to us. So what are the signs people not listening? Okay, they don't interact with you, okay? They tend to be monologues, okay? They never look at you, okay? They never make eye contact. Okay, they're always formulating the speech they're going to make to you in their mind while you're talking. That's the big problem with listening. Most of the time, that's what we're doing. What are signs that you might know of that people aren't listening? Okay, when they say okay, we had a Hispanic minister here years ago that I learned what it meant when he told me okay. It meant, I heard you, I'm going to ignore you now. And I began to think that was a Spanish word for ignore. Okay. That may or may not be true. What does it take to listen to people? In what way? How do we have to understand? Okay. See, I told you, Spanish, that's what okay means.
She just kept standing.
Well, that's true. It takes some understanding. Okay. Okay. The background of the person and what's really going on in their life. Okay. You have to want to. Wanting to is hard. I mean, most of the time we go, well, I'll listen to you if I can make my speech next. I'll put up with you. And that happens a lot. So the desire to listen is important as well. Okay, you can't talk if you're talking, you can't listen. And that's a real problem. Harry?
That's my problem. Thinking about what
Okay. You have to pay attention to them, don't you? Okay. It's interesting because listening is a skill that few people learn because they're either too busy trying to talk or they really don't want to understand you. That's especially true if someone's in pain. Because to listen to someone in pain puts you in pain. And you do it well. That's a problem.
But it's hard to listen
Okay.
for a fixer like me.
That's right.
And it's like, what can I do to make this better?
That's the problem with men and women, for instance. When a man listens to a woman, you know what he does next? If I were you, I would. She doesn't care. She just wants to bleed all over the floor. And you go, oh, I'm so sorry. That is terrible. Now, my wife was, she was expecting her first child, we had an obstetrician. I love this guy. And because we lived 40 miles away, I had to do my business in Austin when on those days we went to the obstetrician. So I would go and sit in the office with her. A lot of people thought I was being sweet. I was being efficient. I would have hid that more today, but I didn't then. And so, but she got in there. She's about 8.5 months pregnant. Her feet have swollen, all this stuff. And she says, I feel terrible. And then she starts going through her symptoms. And I'll never forget the doctor. He gave me my line. He said, that's too bad. Didn't do anything else. And so if I really don't want to eat that night, I will always say, that's too bad. And you have to get more involved with that. So we're going to talk about listening today because we're in the middle of the book of Job, and like the first video you saw, it doesn't appear anybody's listening very well. So far in the study of Job, who's not listening? His friends aren't listening, okay. Is Job listening? As much as he can. And now, that's an interesting comment because we help people listen or we hinder people listening. For Job, they have hindered him. And they don't want to hear from Job. They got it all figured out. We don't need to do anything else. So, why don't they listen? Why don't the friends listen to him? Okay, they already have an answer that they don't want to know what the problem is. Okay. He's got a sin problem. They know what to do with the sin problem. If he'll just do what they tell him to, they can go home. That's how efficient this is. They don't listen because they already know the answer. How would listening have changed the situation we've seen so far? Okay, they might have been more sympathetic.
Well, odd that they're his friends. They really don't seem to know him that well.
Okay, they seem not to know him. They seem to be more remote. They're used what I'd call clinical. Clinical person wants to diagnose, and they don't want to really know what your problem is. Here's our standard procedure on all of this. So this is what's taking place. I like this statement that I found a few years ago. Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something. Now run that through your experience and see if the people who have infuriated you the most just want to say something rather than having something to say. In Job, we find the friends just wanting to say something, but they didn't really have anything to say. So we're going to go back to this because we are in round 2. Job is arranged in a series of speeches. There are 3 series plus 1. I'll tell you about the plus 1 later. We've approached the first one. In fact, we did the first round in 1 lesson a round. Eliphaz, the speaker from experience, goes first. Job would answer him. He would be followed by Bildad, the voice of tradition, and Job would answer him. And then it would be Zophar, the passionate, hot-headed young man, and Job would answer him. Now the problem, we took 3 weeks going through that. If we did that the rest of the book, we'd be here until Jesus comes again. And some of us don't have that much time. So we're going to take round 2 and round 3 in 1 lesson. Partly because they don't add a lot new to their speeches. I always love it when you said everything you need to say, and then you say it again and again and again. In this round, these 3 will do this. We're going to handle the lesson this way. We're going to go through all 3 of these men, then Job's response in one. That's the most efficient way I knew how to do it. When we get to a few lessons down, Zophar drops out. In fact, this is the last time you'll meet Zophar. Zophar, since he's a young man, he's impatient. He's had it with Job after this. He's told him everything Job needs to know, and Job's not going to do it, so why should he waste his breath? Tells you a little bit about Zophar, but he'll be replaced by a man named Elihu, who's younger, who has a different viewpoint. When I was probably 6 years old, I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in a small church. And that small church, it was not back in the 60s. If you don't know anything about the 60s in the church, the 60s in the church was 2 years in a cloud of dust. Meaning that a preacher would stay 2 years, and U-Haul always could put him on appointment. 2 years, he'd be gone. So we went through a series of 8. When I was there for 8 years, we had a series of 4 preachers. One was inexperienced but a nice guy. One was a scoundrel. One was lazy. But the guy at the very beginning, I remember, he says that we had dinner with him one time. I was 6 years old. If you remember anything a preacher says when you're 6 years old, he said something important. Understand that. If you remember anything a preacher says when you're 60 years old, it's something important. I remember we were having dinner. He made this comment. He said, what I have learned is when a preacher has lost his point, he gets real loud and real passionate because he's trying to find himself. Now, I was 6 years old. I'm now 69. So 63 years later, that's still true. When you can't get your point across, say it louder and meaner. Just start shouting at people and say, what do you mean? You don't know what you're doing? There you go. That'll get your point across, won't it? I like what Glenn Owen was a speaker for the Herald of Truth for years. And Glenn was a fabulous guy because he knew English, and he was also fluent in Portuguese and Spanish. Glenn was one of these guys, short. He could get kind of hot-headed. He had bought Chevrolet pickups all his life. And he went to the Ford place. He said, I think I'll just shop the Ford place and see about shopping for a new pickup. And so the Ford salesman says to him something like this. He said, only an idiot's going to buy a Chevrolet pickup. And he said, not in a very quiet voice, are you calling me an idiot? He got home and his wife said, and he reported all this. She said, well, when you got finished, did you offer him a Bible study? Well, you see, when you get upset, you tend to do things that you wouldn't do any other way, and that's what these guys probably are doing. They're getting louder and meaner. So we're going to go to Eliphaz first. Eliphaz, the voice of experience, has the same approach, but he deepens it a little bit. He starts off with just being mean. Just being mean. Would a wise person answer with empty notions? Or fill their belly with a hot east wind? You think you're so smart, don't you? You wouldn't answer us if you were really wise, but the way you answer us, it proves how stupid you are. And you're nothing but a windbag. It's the second time he calls him a windbag, by the way. He starts by insulting Job. He said, Job, you're not smart enough to figure this out. We're smart enough. We're the wise men here. I'm wise, you're empty-headed, therefore you need to just be quiet and listen to me. And that's his whole approach. He says, first of all, you're guilty. And we've seen this before. He says, your sin prompts your mouth. You're speaking about your own innocence. There is that statement out of Macbeth that says, methinks you doth protest too much. That's what he's saying. He said, you've been protesting so much, you must be guilty. And he says, your own mouth condemns you. You're guilty. They testify against you. You're proving it every time you open your mouth. He said, and on top of that, let me tell you, I agree with that. I'm going to condemn you. Are you the first man who was ever born? Were you brought forth before the hills? Do you listen in on God's counsel? You have a monopoly on wisdom. What do you know that we don't know? You hear the drip, drip, drip of the anger and the frustration and the calling Job absolutely worthless. That's what he's doing there. And so there's this constant movement that way. And then he says to him, Job, and that means you're deserving of what you get. Terrifying sounds fill his ears, the ears of the wicked, when all seems well. And then he says, marauders attack him. And if you go back to chapter 1, he loses his sheep and his flocks because marauders have come and stolen them. He harkens back to why he is in terrible shape. He despairs of escaping the realm of darkness. He's marked for the sword. He feels like he's fated to death. So you're deserving of that. That's what the wicked do. Now, how would you describe Eliphaz? Arrogant? Okay. He seems to be, doesn't he? Very arrogant. Pardon? Clueless. He has no idea. He thinks he's wise when he doesn't know anything. It's interesting. Eliphaz has an interesting viewpoint. And the second is Bildad, the traditionalist. Bildad doesn't change either. By the way you know if somebody has listened to you is they will change their approach. If they don't and just deepen the way they've done, they don't listen, they haven't heard you yet. How long will you hunt for words? He says, consider and then we will speak. Listen to us. Why are we counted like cattle? We are stupid in your sight. Job, you think we're just a bunch of nincompoops? We fell off the turnip truck yesterday? You won't listen to us because you don't know what wisdom even looks like. He's totally uninterested in what Job has to say. Remember about listening, you have to at least be interested in the person and what they're going to say. He has no interest at all. And he begins to use a series of illustrations. He says, first of all, you're like a candle being put out and smoldering. My grandson loves to go around blowing out candles. My wife has fooled him because she bought the ones that run on batteries. That is the most fun thing to do, is to watch a 5-year-old try to blow out a candle that doesn't blow out. But most of the time, if it's a regular candle, it goes out and you get the trail of smoke above it. He says, indeed, the light of the wicked, listen to the word, the light of the wicked is put out, and the flame of his fire does not shine. The reason your life is such a mess is because you are like a candle that's being extinguished. And that's what happens to the wicked. So if your light is being extinguished, that means you are wicked. And the light is dark in his tent, his lamp above him is put out. There's no light in your life. Now he's telling Job everything he understands already. Secondly, he says, you're like a man caught in a net, like an animal caught in a net, for he's cast into a net by his own feet. You have now been captured, and you can't get out of this on your own. And so it is that Job finds himself like a rabbit in a snare. Struggles and struggles and struggles, he said, but you're never going to get out of this because you're guilty. He also calls him a man who is like a fugitive being pursued, being hunted down. And so he says, he is torn from his tent in which he trusted and is brought to the king of terrors. There's someone who's hunting you down and you're having to run away, but one day he's going to catch you. You think you can run away because you think you're innocent? No. One day you're going to get caught. And in his tent dwells, which is none of his, sulfur is scattered over his habitation. Have you ever smelled sulfur? Why, sulfur is terrible. He said, your life has that smell to it. It's that way. He talks about a tree that's been rooted up. His roots dry beneath and the branches wither above. There's no root left to your life. If you've ever seen a tree that doesn't have great root system, it's interesting. When we lived on the Gulf Coast, we had a weekend where we had a tropical storm, very mild tropical storm, but we also had about 10 inches of rain in it, and it was high tide. Bad combination, by the way, if you're 7 feet above sea level. And so we had this drainage ditch in front of our house that was probably 5 feet deep. The water filled that up and came into our yard. I would measure my danger level by how far it came into my yard. And it was coming up pretty good. But my neighbor next door to us, she had a tree. And they call them tallow trees. I don't know what they're really called. But a tallow tree grows fast. It's pretty, but it doesn't have any roots. And so when the rain fell, the 10 inches, the tree just fell over out of the ground over her driveway. When you don't have a very good root system, your life is not very good. Things, if you're not deep, you're always in danger. He says, so he has no posterity or progeny among his people, and no survivors where he used to live. A reference to his dead children. Another piece where he goads him of his pain. He says, you don't know God. Surely such are the dwellings of the unrighteous. Such is the place of him who knows not God. You don't know God. So how do you describe Bildad? Mean and nasty? Pretty much. Cruel, condescending? Those are all things that are true. He has, just think, you're really struggling, and all you get is a guy who keeps pouring it on you. Then there's Zophar the hothead. Now, this is always interesting when the last speaker is worse than the first. Then Zophar the Naamite answered and said, therefore my thoughts answer me. Understand that. He says, I thought about this for about 10 seconds, and this is what I've come up with. You ever know teenagers that do that? I got this thing all figured out. Because of my haste in me, I hear censures that insult me. I'm insulted. How dare you talk to someone like me this way? He says life's pretty simple. Is life simple? Life is complicated. But for at least Zophar in his youth, he has decided life is pretty simple. Do you not know from this of old, since man was placed on the earth, and that the exalting of the wicked is short, the joy of the godless is for a moment? He says it's very, very simple. The righteous live a long time, the wicked die quickly. There you go. That thumbnail sketch. All of life can be answered that. If you see somebody who's wicked, they're about to die. You see somebody who's rich, well, they must be righteous. Whew. Take that in, because we're going to have to come back to this. He said, utter darkness is laid up for his treasures. He said, this is a wicked man's portion from God, the heritage decreed to him by God. If you're wicked, this is what you're going to get. Without question. You're going to have a short life. You're going to lose all your goods. You're going to be miserable, and good riddance. He says the wicked will die early in life. They have a short lifespan because their lifestyle is always going to do that. They will experience calamity, and they are not righteous. They don't do good things. And so if they have experienced calamity, it shows they are both wicked and irrighteous. You can judge who is what by doing one simple thing. Are they in trouble? They're in trouble. That must mean something. And illness and death proves you're unrighteous. That's his thumbnail sketch of life. Now, he's not going to speak again, so good riddance. I imagine when he decided to get up and said, I'm finished, everybody applauded. Because they didn't like him anyway. So now Job gets a chance to respond. But how would you respond if you were Job? What, tell him to leave? Okay. How would you respond? Would you be patient? Huh? Okay. Okay, you were quiet. Now that I appreciate the quiet. It's interesting. Job has to respond to all this stuff. To Eliphaz, he says, I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted with you. I have heard many things like these. You're miserable comforters, all of you. You came to give me comfort, and all you've done is make me miserable. That's a real accusation that is absolutely true. He's worse now than at the beginning. As the saying goes, if you have friends like these, you don't need enemies. I'm disgusted. But he also says, but come now, all of you, try again. I will not find a wise man among you. Okay, go ahead. Shoot it all off. I want to hear it all again. And I'm going to tell you, at the end of the day, you won't be smarter than when you started. And see, Job is now getting very tart with his responses. He's tired of this. He also says, though, I'm despondent. My days have passed, my plans are shattered. Yet the desires of my heart turn night into day. I have hope, he says, but the light's going out. If the only home I hope for is the grave, if I spread out my bed in the realm of darkness, if I say to corruption, you are my father, and to the worm, my mother or my sister, where then is my hope? He says, if all I've got left to do is die, who can see any hope for me? He says, I've been looking for some help here. I've been looking, hoping that you would say something that would elevate my spirit to say, this can happen better for you. He said, you just keep crushing me. Some people do that. Will it go down to the gates of death? Will we descend together into the dust? To Bildad, he says, how long will you torment me and break me in pieces with words? You're a tormentor. He says, with these 10 times you cast reproach upon me, are you not ashamed to have wronged me? Do you not feel shame in all of this? He says, have mercy. Have mercy, oh you, my friends. Now he's begging. I'm not wicked, I'm sick. I need some help. What can you do? And then there's this passage in Job 19. We get a song from it, but we misunderstand it through the song. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at last he will stand on earth. And after my sin has thus been destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me. The Redeemer is the kinsman Redeemer. That's the term for it. If you go back to the book of Ruth, you find it illustrated in the best possible way. The idea is that I have something that is precious to me that I need someone to help me with. And usually it's a relative who says, I will come and I will bear the burden with you. And so that's what Boaz does for Ruth. He takes her for his wife so that he can keep her ancestral strain going and the property going. He takes care of her needs. He said, I may die, but I know someone will be there to bear my case. Now, we understand when you get to the New Testament that Jesus is like the kinsman redeemer. He's the one that will plead the case for us. Whether Job understood that or not, I really doubt. But at least he understood that somewhere along the line, someone can appear before God for him. And so he had the only glimmer of hope is somehow, some way, he would get his case presented before God. In Zophar, we'll go back there, he says to him, listen to my words and let this be your comfort. Bear with me and I will speak. And after I've spoken, mock on. Why don't you just listen to what I've got to say? Very powerful statement, Ron. The best thing he does, I think you're right, because he has already surveyed everything and has come to the conclusion, I cannot think of anything I have done to deserve all of this. That's why he wants God to speak to him. Tell me what I've done, because I don't know. So he tells Zophar, listen to me. And he questions his assumptions. Here's his assumptions. Why do the wicked live? See, he's answering an assumption. Why do the wicked live, reach an old age, grow mighty in power? He said, what you have said, if you are wicked, you're going to die early. He said, why is it there are so many old men who are wicked? Now we know that. Joseph Stalin was the premier, or whatever he was, of Russia during the Second World War and into the Cold War. Joseph Stalin executed 20 million people. He makes Adolf Hitler look like a plaything. He didn't die quickly. He was 74 when he died. So much for that. The second thing he says, behold, is not there prosperity in their hands? The counsel of the wicked is far from me. He said, you say that the righteous are prosperous, but the wicked suffer deprivation. He said, that's not true. I want you to think for a moment. Right now in our world today, Vladimir Putin is a terrible human being. No good way to say that. But he's living in the lap of luxury right now. He doesn't have to fight at the front. He gets to eat. He gets to do what he wants to. So much for the argument that the wicked are punished and the righteous prosper. How often is it that the lamp of the wicked is put out? Their calamity comes upon them, that God distributes pains in his anger? Can you show me that every wicked man suffers? That's exactly right. He finds the contradiction in all of this. And it's the biggest, one of the things I'm amazed at when I look at this, Job is still thinking. I'm not sure if I were in that situation, I would be thinking that clearly. Job is still thinking, still processing. But he says, one dies and is full of vigor and being wholly at ease and secure, in his pails full of milk and the marrow of his bones moist, but another dies in bitterness of the soul, never having to taste prosperity. He said, we all die. All of us. And whether you're rich or poor, whether you're powerful or not, if you're wicked or righteous, you're going to die, and you're going to die whenever you need to die. It has nothing to do with anything else. And so Job comes to this, and it's interesting as you try to pull all of these chapters together. Next week we're having another one of those lessons like that. The words of a critic may be true, or they may be false. Just because they're a critic doesn't mean they're false. But you have to examine them carefully to figure that out. One of the best things they ever told me is when someone criticizes, tell them this: there are some things you're right about, there are some things you probably are not right about, and there are some things you're just dead wrong about. I'll try to correct the things you're right about. Not a bad way of doing it. I like this. It talks about a critic. A critic is a blind man in a dark room searching for a black cat who isn't there and finding it. That's a critic. That's a critic. So he said that's exactly what's happening to you. Also, lighten burdens, don't increase them. That's one of the biggest problems with these speeches, is they kept getting him, putting more and more and more on his shoulders. The New Testament says, bear one another's burdens, so fulfill the law of Christ. Put a shoulder on it and help somebody feel better and have more hope. One man has a prayer. His prayer is, Lord, help me today not to add to anyone's burdens. Not a bad prayer, because it's always easy for us to create more trouble for people than it is to help them. Next week, we take round 3 with only 2 speakers left, and Job's final response to them. So hope you'll join us next week. We'll see you then.